Hello, podcast listeners. Hope everyone's having a wonderful Wednesday or whatever day of the week it just happens to be as you lend me your ear. Some of you may know I've been working in the film industry, specifically the documentary world, for the last year. This week I decided to get a history lesson on the film industry in Edmonton, so I went to the top authority in town, Josh Miller. Josh is the first ever CEO of the brand new Edmonton Screen Industries Office. The new organization is an updated version of the former Edmonton Film and TV Commission, and their mandate is to help lead Edmonton in becoming a national and international center for media production excellence. Josh is a man with an extensive background in the film industry, working in both Canada and the US, and he plans to utilize his wealth of experience and knowledge to enable the success of media producers in our fair city of champions. Please enjoy the fantastic stories of Josh Miller. Sitting here today with Josh Miller. Is it Josh or Joshua?
Well, Joshua when my mother's mad at me, but normally it's Josh.
I always wonder with that because my name's Shane. There's no like a long and short version, so I'm always like, do I call people by Mike, Michael, Josh, Joshua?
Yeah, but you know what? That's a great film name.
Joshua Miller?
No, Shane.
Oh, yeah. I saw that once a long time ago. My mom tried to show me, and I think I was too young to get the gist of it. But
it's a classic.
Yeah. So, first of all, tell me a little bit about this building we're in, because I've never seen it or heard of it before today, and it's quite unique.
Okay, well, we're at the Prince of Wales Armory here in Edmonton. This was built in about 102 years ago as a drill hall, obviously for the military, excuse me. And, it was owned obviously by the federal government, and then over time, and of course I've seen early pictures of it, there's nothing around it at the time. It kind of went a little bit downhill, and then the feds deeded it over to the city, and the city decided to make it a heritage building. And what they did was they built right in the middle of it the City of Edmonton Archives. So there's a building within a building.
Right.
And then all the office space around the perimeter they gave to sort of non-profit societies. So the Edmonton Arts Council, the Edmonton Heritage Council, the Edmonton Sports Council all have offices here, and there's meeting space and so forth. So when my organization, which we'll talk about, started up, I didn't have any footprint. So the Arts Council offered me space here, and which is great because now I didn't have to find a place, and there's lots of infrastructure, and it's a really cool building.
Yeah, and they've got like all sorts of little rooms with history and different historical military exhibits and things like that. Is it free to go to all those places?
Yeah,
donation or?
Well, I'm sure they have a donation box, but yeah, there's the RCMP Museum down there. There's a telephone museum, believe it or not. There's the archives. So it is a public building. It does have sort of certain hours where people can come in, and we get lots of school groups coming through. And then I understand people rent different spaces for weddings or other celebrations. So it gets a lot of use.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to talk about your new organization eventually, the Edmonton Screen Industries Office, but I want to give a little bit of background and context of your history just so people kind of know where we end up now today.
Well, I'll try to make it brief.
Please don't. Be as long-winded and as detailed as you can.
All right. Well, I grew up here in Edmonton, and I did lots of different stuff, as I was going to school. But I was a musician. I played keyboards, and I played in a lot of bands in the mid to late 70s. And I thought that was going to be my career. But at a certain point, I realized that I didn't quite have, I'd go see somebody who's really spectacular and go, I don't think I'm ever going to reach that level.
Right. So, at the start, was it lucrative for you, or was it
playing in rock bands?
Yeah.
Or you know what? It wasn't really early on because all the money we got we put into buying new equipment.
Right, which makes sense.
A point where you've got, unlike the film industry, there's a point where you've got everything you need, and then you can start putting some money away. So instead of having a part-time job in high school as doing whatever, that was that's how I made my beer money.
Right. Where was the best place or your favorite place to play back in the day?
They used to have these things called socials at the Central Administration Building at U of A, which is CAB. I think it's still there. Mm-hmm. It's like a big cafeteria during the day, but they'd have these, I think once a month they'd have these socials, and they'd set up the band right in front of the big staircase. And those were great gigs.
Were you in high school when you were doing that?
I started in junior high, and then all through high school, and then a little bit when I was going to U of A as well.
So you got to check out the college girls while you were a little bit younger.
And also, it was a different scene here then, because this is pre-disco. So every hotel had a tavern, and they had what they called a cabaret, which is where you brought a date to dance. And so there was a lot of bands, and we would kind of rotate every 3 weeks or a month from room to room to room at different hotels. So it's really vibrant. And then disco came in, and the hotel owners found out, what, I can hire one person instead of 6. And that was really killed the live music scene.
Right.
But anyway, I started getting really interested. Movies were a place to take a date, and, it's a social thing. But then I started getting really interested in the artistry and the craft, and so I started going to movies by myself. I started learning about movies that were hard to find here, like foreign films and so forth. I mean, again, we're like pre even VHS.
Right. So where would you go to do this research without the internet, without the capabilities of sort of worldwide communication?
Yeah, there was the same theaters now that are art house theaters in town, like the Princess and the one, the Garna, would bring in movies, and so you'd take that would help. Also, it was a different cinema owned by different owners, but the downtown in the downtown City Center Mall,
right on the top floor there.
Yeah, they had more interesting, different kinds of films, niche films. And then I started reading books. I took a course in screenwriting from a guy who was a former cop and had written for like 1 hour cop shows in LA.
Interesting.
And just whatever I could lay my hands on. But the big breakthrough for me was I was how old was I? 21 still. My dad's secretary was the sister of a Hollywood director by the name of Arthur Hiller. Arthur had grown up in Edmonton and then gone to Toronto and then New York and then LA, and he became famous for directing a film called Love Story. So, and he had done many, many films. So my dad said, write him a letter, And I thought, okay, I'll probably go right into the garbage can, but it didn't.
Right.
Arthur wrote back and said, as it turns out, we're coming to Calgary to shoot this film called The Silver Streak with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. This is 1976. So you can come down and hang around for the 3 weeks.
No way.
So, yeah.
You must have just been losing your mind. Like that's.
I was like, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to frame the letter. It's just. And I was in a band at the time. I had to ask them for 3 weeks leave.
Right.
But they were great, and so I went down there, and I just by the second day on set, I said, this is what I want to do. It's kind of like. When you get the bug, right?
Who did you kind of key in on when you were there on set?
Well, I ended up working a lot with the ADs because they decided to make me a PA and gave me a walkie, and so I dealt with them and I wrangled extras.
Oh, so you worked yourself into a job.
I did. Like the first 2 days, I was standing there. I felt like an idiot, and I started picking up light stands and helping them carry. And at some point, like normally in Hollywood, you could never do that because of the union stuff. But when they were on location, they said, I'll give the guy a walkie. So
right.
That's how it started. Then I came back here and I said, okay, that's what I want to do. I finished off my arts degree, but I switched to everything in fine arts. So I took all theater courses because there wasn't even film studies at the time. And then I applied to film schools where I would learn, which offered courses in directing, editing, cinematography, screenwriting. There wasn't any in Canada. I mean, there was Ryerson and even Nate, but they were more technical oriented. Mm-hmm. So I eventually got accepted at a few schools in the U.S., and the one that was the most, prestigious was NYU in New York. So I packed my bag, and this would have been in 1977, and got on a plane and went to New York.
Had you been to New York before?
Once when I was 15, and I thought, who could live here? Like I was
right. Yeah, exactly.
And here I am going, but it was. Half the education was what I learned going to film school, and the other half was just living in that city at that time.
I can imagine so.
Yeah.
What's your take on something like film school specifically, or even just school and post-secondary in general? Like, it seems to be an ongoing trend that people are like, no, just get into the work, just learn by doing. What are your feelings there?
I've evolved on that. I mean, what's good about film school is you make friendships that if, as you're moving forward in the industry, you help each other out, give each other a leg up. And you have the room to fail too, because it's, you don't have a client and,
right.
So you don't have that stress. The thing that's changed is how much it costs. And for the amount you pay to go to film school now, you could buy pretty up, pretty much, state of the art gear.
Right.
Back then, of course, you couldn't. When I started, it was still film, right? There was video just came out, like the Sony Portapak was like my last year of school there. So you kind of, to have access to that gear, it was either a co-op or school. So now when people ask me about it, I say, I guess if you can afford it, mm-hmm. and it doesn't put you into debt that you're paying off the rest of your life, sure. But you could take that money or not even half that money and buy equipment and join a co-op and start making movies and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I mean, with online distribution, you can just start doing your own stuff until someone notices and then says, hey, well, I'll pay you to do something for me, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of great examples of that where people have done things and got discovered, and I think Drunk History started that way, right? Something like that. A few of them. So yeah, I mean, now those kind of opportunities didn't exist back then. So it made sense to go to film school, and it wasn't that expensive at the time.
And throughout film school, did you know what your niche was going to be in the industry?
No, I mean, everybody goes in thinking they're going to be a director,
right?
And I quickly found out the thing I was weakest at was editing. I didn't know anything about editing, so I threw myself into editing. And it turns out the American Cinema Editors, their kind of their guild, had a student editing competition where you could, I think it was $40, and they would send you some professional footage, and you'd cut it into a scene and send it back to them. And so I went to all my colleagues in school. I said, if you need an editor, I'll edit your movie as well as my own. And so, sorry
to jump in, but just want to clarify.
Yeah.
You said video had just come out, but were you editing?
This is film edit. This is like flatbed Steenbeck. I mean, we even had moviolas, but none of us would use them because they would eat your film. So we would rent, there's I don't know if it's still there, but on 9th Avenue, there was something called the Film Center building, and we'd go rent a flatbed there, and we'd use it like in 24 hours. Like we'd have 8-hour shifts.
Unbelievable.
So I'd be working over the middle of the night on some shifts. Anyway, nothing happened the first year, but the second year I entered that, I actually got nominated. I went out to LA to their big dinner, and I won. Actually tied with another guy. I think he's from Minnesota, so we both won. And it was really interesting because out of that, a bunch of editors who were working in Hollywood studios, some in television, some in feature film, invited me and I think the other fella to come and see them where they were.
Amazing.
And so I'm going to like MGM, and I'm like just stars in my eyes, thinking, oh wow, this is incredible. And a very strange thing happened. I met with, the editor guy got a phone call, he got busy, so I started talking to his apprentice, and I said, so, what's the process here?
Yeah.
Well, all that stuff is unionized, and so he said, well, you have to cut sound, because sound was cut on mag stock at the time. You have to do that for, about 3 or 4 years. And then you do assembling, which was, I think, apprenticing. So then you assemble, and then you could then be an assistant where you're working beside the editor and you're doing some editing. And then you could be an editor. I said, well, how many years go by before you move through all those tiers? He said, about 10 years. And I went, wow, I don't think so. I'm sure, obviously, if you went the independent route, you could sit down and start cutting right away. But that blew my mind. So I went back to New York to finish off school, and I thought, I think my highest and best use is as a writer, because that's what I'd always done, and had an aptitude for. So I applied to the American Film Institute. At the time, it's called I think it's called the I can't remember now, but it was called the Center for Advanced Film Studies, and they had a screenwriting program for a year. So I thought, and that would take me to LA. So I got in there. And that was great. Mm-hmm. I had a great year, great instruction, and then when I got out, that's when I started, looking for work.
So when you went that route, was it just nonstop writing? Was it just writing after writing after writing? Like, if you want to be a writer, you got to write.
Yeah, I mean, I had to pay rent too, so I actually found a job. I mean, I did all kinds of production jobs, whatever you can pick up, we've done that. But then I met these guys. This is a bit of a niche-y thing, but they invented computerized teleprompting.
Okay.
So teleprompter is obviously a two-way mirror glass in front of usually a studio TV camera, but now they're in the field, and somebody who's looking on camera and reading news or sports or whatever read off the screen. Well, up till then it had been done mechanically, literally with a scroll and a video camera. Yeah, and
like the old overhead projectors, like that kind of clear material.
Yeah, with a little motor.
Yeah.
And no, it wasn't even acetate. It was like a roll of paper, and they had a typewriter with letters, through 3-inch high. And then when they had last minute edits, they go in with a Sharpie. So it's pretty old technology. Mm-hmm. So these guys had figured out how to make it all computerized, but the best graphic generator at the time for something like that was the Atari computer.
Right.
So they actually adapted these Atari computers to be these computer teleprompters, and they needed guys that could type, that could spell, and knew their way around a set. So I got work from them as a freelance operator, and I'd average maybe working 3 days a week. And then every other spare second, as you just said, I would be back at my place, my apartment, writing.
Did you ever have a trouble with motivation getting started? Seems like staring at the blank page is the most intimidating thing for most people.
Yeah, that is tough. But I think that everybody has a different process. So for me, when I'm starting to think about a story that I'm going to tell, I'll start taking notes on it, and then I'll aggregate all these notes, and then I'll start organizing the notes into, scenes or sequences, and then, before long I'll have a treatment. And then from there I'll go to a first draft and add the dialogue in. So it's kind of like, and I also figured out when I started that if you try to climb the, Mount Everest right away, you're going to, it's not going to work out so well. So you should maybe start with smaller formats. Right. So when I started writing my own stuff, I started doing half hours. And because you need to go through the process and get to the end, and then go back and rewrite, and we all know this. It's easier to do that when it's only a 25 or 30 pager as opposed to 112 pages.
Right, of course. You bite off as much as you can chew at the time. And,
and I didn't know if anybody would buy those. I was pretty sure they wouldn't, but I knew I needed it for my learning process. And then, as it turns out, many years later, one of them did get sold as a pilot, and it led to 4 seasons of a TV series, which I show ran. So
that's unbelievable.
You never know.
So that was about the time you moved to Hollywood, and you were living there full time?
Yeah, so I'm living there. Like I said, I'm working the teleprompting job. I'm taking any kind of film jobs, and then I get my first writing assignment. The first one was on I got by virtue of being Canadian. It was just when Americans, they were starting to, with the specialty networks that didn't have big either subscribers or viewership yet, so they needed inexpensive programming. They wanted original programming, but they had to do it on the cheap. So this was a CBC/Disney Channel family show called Danger Bay that they shot in Vancouver because of the aquarium, right? It was supposed to be exciting stories around the aquarium. So that was my first shot, and as it turns out, it was a half-hour show. And then I started getting more assignments. I got work on a series that was based on the Friday the 13th films called Friday's Curse. Those were 1 hours, and they're horror. I got on a staff position on a show that was pretty bad for Dick Clark Productions called Trial by Jury, hosted by Raymond Burr. It was like courtroom testimony type series.
Right. So how does that work? Like you're a writer, but when someone's telling you what to write and maybe disagreeing with what you're putting out, how do you balance those two things?
Well, of course, if they're paying if they're writing a check to you, then you have to make them happy. But you try to do it in a way that either addresses their note, maybe isn't the change they specifically asked, but you drill down and go, okay, what's behind this note?
Yeah.
And maybe you come up with a better solution and you throw it at them. And if they say, hey, that does solve it, that's good. I'm glad you came back. So you try to do that. But at the end of the day, if they say, no, I want it this way, then you have to make it work.
Right. So there's no compromise. It's what they say at the end of the day. If they're holding steadfast, you've got to just sort of bow to their wishes in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you also pick your battles. I mean, there are things that are really super important and there are things that are minor. And so, don't seem to be inflexible by fighting over every comma. And, if there's small things that, you can just go with those and then try to fight the bigger battles.
Right. And then how does it feel when you've written something and you've got a particular scene or an idea or even the whole story in your head and you put it on paper and then all of a sudden it gets to the actor and the director and you see it changing? How does that make you feel?
Well, it's different in television and film. In television, especially when you're a showrunner, it doesn't change unless you say it changes. Okay, so the writer has a lot more power. But you'd be silly not to take input from people that are talented, and especially in their own field, right? And I was always just thrilled when somebody came up with an idea that was better, some actors would read lines. Well, you'd be in the editing room later and you go, how did they think that it was supposed to be read that way, and the director. And other times they would take a line and read it in a way that you went, oh, I didn't think of it that way. That's way better. Yeah. So that, on feature films, you put in your script and then you're not really involved in the process. Some directors will keep the writer at their side, but most don't because they want to be able to make those changes. So it may come out the other side looking a little different. And that's just part of the process.
But is that a little nerve-wracking knowing that like your reputation as a writer is dependent on the people down the chain from you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a collaborative kind of medium, so you have to, hopefully you can work with people that, they are talented and you trust, and they trust you and you trust them. It doesn't always work out that way. You always have the option to take your name off the script if it turns out to be something that you just wouldn't want to have it. Yeah. So I haven't ever done that, but you could if as a last resort.
So what brought you back to Canada ultimately?
Well, we were down there and I got married and then we started having kids and we went from 1 to 3 kids because we had twins.
Canadian girl or American girl?
My wife is Michelle and I met her in New York.
Okay.
So American. Yeah. And she came out to LA and anyway, we were looking for a bigger house and we started thinking about whether that was the best place to raise kids and what the cost would be and all that stuff. We did our pro and con columns. And her family's still back in New York, so it was a possibility of going there or moving up here. And I said, well, I don't know what I do for work. So on just a visit up here, I started kicking tires for jobs, and I got a job interview with a fellow named Dr. Allard, who owned the original Super Channel and ITV, which is now Global. And he was a very, very successful, surgeon who became a very, very successful businessman. And anyway, we met, and he was very, kind, and he just said, "I'll let you know this week." And then I headed back down, and then I got a phone call and got hired. So what did I get hired as? So they had a Super Channel, like most of the broadcasters at the time, as a condition of license, had to spend money on independent production, both investing in the productions, but also script and project development. So they had somebody who was running that, who was like a script development officer was the title, and she had left to go on to run the Saskatchewan Film Commission, and the job was open. So that was a job that I got. So once I had the job, we packed everybody up and moved back here, and that was 1990.
And that was for Super Channel that you're working for? So when you say they've got a specific amount of money that's put aside for certain projects or script development, who determines that?
Well, when everything is changing, okay, but at the time,
we're going to get to that too.
Yeah, all the broadcasters in Canada, in order to, they're granted a license by the CRTC because the airwaves are considered a public trust. So the CRTC says to them, okay, what are you going to propose to do? Both as, what you're broadcasting, what are you going to broadcast, when, and whatever. And what are you going to put back into the Canadian system?
Right.
And this was really successful on radio because look at the music industry and the huge Canadian stars that came out of Canadian content on music. So they were trying to do the same thing with television broadcasting. So all of these broadcasters say, well, we're going to do this and do that. So Super Channel had said, we are going to put in $1 million a year into developing scripts and projects with independent producers. So that was
from Canada.
Yes, yeah. And all across Canada, but being Western based, there was a lot of people here in the West that got benefit from that.
Mm-hmm. And so, what would you look for as head of development there? What kind of projects caught your eye?
It's interesting. It was pretty eclectic. It wasn't like we were a network where so we said, okay, we're only going to do 1 hour dramas, or it was it was a pay TV network. So movies were primarily of interest that might end up on that Super Channel would license and have it on their service. Mm-hmm. But we put money into TV series, and when I say I mean Super Channel, and documentaries, all kinds of different things. The idea was to help bring along the industry here, so help producers go to the next level. Hopefully their projects are with writers that are local. Mm-hmm. And the projects, if they would shoot here. And for me, my goal always was when I was there, that we had a project that we developed that then we licensed. Mm-hmm. That at the end there's a soundstage which is still there right next to Global that was owned by ITV at the time. Right
off Allard Way.
Yeah, and
Film Alberta.
Yeah, it's now called Film Alberta. And the project would shoot there, so sort of a triple. And it sounds like that would be a natural thing, but it actually took a while to get to that point. But it happened with a project called The Song Spinner, which was a really nice kind of fantasy. I won't say it was a TV movie; it was a feature in my mind, with Patti LuPone starring in it. Mm-hmm. And we developed it, we licensed it, a shot in the studio. So at that point, I thought it was kind of like where from here. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't really an opportunity to go higher up in that job stream. So I started thinking about getting into independent production at that point. So it was like 5 years there.
Yeah. And so when did you finally make the jump, or what was sort of the last straw before you said, all right, I'm going out on my own?
Well, having got that project done, so having sort of those check boxes done, I thought, okay, now it's time to look around. I hadn't been a producer. I'd been a freelance screenwriter prior to that. So I thought, I don't know if I want to hang out my own shingle. I wonder if I could join a company that's looking for someone to manage their script development. And it turns out there was a company in Saskatchewan called Mind's Eye that was a growing concern. And we'd done business with them when I was at Super Channel, and they were looking for somebody to do that. And I said... And we started talking, and I said, I can't move to Saskatchewan. My family's got all our roots here. So we decided to open up an Edmonton office for that and do production in both Saskatchewan and Alberta. So that's what we did.
That's unreal. So we're kind of like just getting into contemporary times, but I want to take a quick retrospective look back, because you said that part of the mandate at Super Channel and other various broadcasters in the West was really to help develop the industry here. So, when you think film cities in Canada, you think naturally Vancouver, Toronto, and Calgary kind of recently, and I guess back in the 70s as well too, just because of their geography. But Edmonton typically doesn't come up in the international list of film cities and destinations. So where has Edmonton been, and where did it start kind of in terms of the film industry, in terms of things filming here, productions originating from here?
All right. Well, let me get to that in a moment. I just want to clarify. It wasn't just in the West. It was all across Canada. Right. It wasn't just in Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver. It was in all the cities. And the reason for that was the Broadcast Act actually said that the government, through the CRTC, had an obligation to foster and support film and television production across Canada.
Right.
Okay. So that meant being good Canadians, that meant everywhere.
Of course.
And so those things were set up so that productions could happen in Winnipeg, they could happen in Calgary, all that kind of stuff. So that was the idea then. In terms of Alberta, going back to our history, I mean, there's a rich history. There's I have to remember the name of it, but there's a book written by a former film commissioner, Bill Marsden, which has all the rich history going back. Of course, it started out as documentary films and commercial films and all that kind of stuff. I would say one of the big break. There was also some genre films that shot. But probably the person who was most, the pioneer in this was Phil Fraser, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year, who started doing films here in Edmonton, and he did a film in the 70s called Why Shoot the Teacher, which was based on a really well-known book, and they cast Bud Cort in it, and it turned out to be a really, really beautiful film.
Why did they decide to shoot it here?
Phil was from here. He felt like we could do it from here. Dr. Allard, same thing when we talk about Super Channel. They all felt that we could do world-class production from here. And that while we had some challenges, we also had some advantages. And then Phil started doing more films based on the success of that, and so that kind of got that going. And then sort of next wave after that of filmmakers were people like Ann Wheeler and Arvi Limatainen and Mark and Revan Dalgoy, who were more on the documentary side. But basically they all worked together and apart and did a bunch of films, and Ann did a film called Bye Bye Blues, which was kind of autobiographical about her mother and set in the 40s, and it was a fantastic film, and so that was another milestone for us in terms of. And then people like me and Margaret Marderosian and others came along, and we started doing our thing in the 90s. So that's kind of the progression, and sort of everybody stood on the shoulders of people before. I think Phil started AMPIA, which is the provincial organization representing producers and others in the film and TV industry. They started the annual film awards, which are called the Rosies, and what else got started back then? Anyway, the original film agency, which was the Alberta Motion Picture Development Corporation.
Right. Is that right on 109th and 104th?
It doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It was an agency set up, I think they gave it a budget of $4 million to foster film and television in Alberta. That was run originally by a fellow named Lord McPherson. No other province had that.
Okay.
We were like way ahead of the curve on that one. And that was around until Ralph Klein's government came in, and then they, in the cost-saving environment they closed a lot of things down. That was one of them.
Right. So other than producers, directors, writers being from Edmonton or Alberta in general, what incentivizes people to want to shoot here and to create projects and homegrown stuff?
Are you talking about people who are here or people who are coming here from outside?
Well, let's discuss both. I mean, let's think everyone. Let's think objectively, and being from here aside. So maybe that precludes people from here. But what attracts people to shoot in Edmonton? What are the advantages?
Well, I know for people that let's talk about the local producers, because that one's fairly simple. Unless it's something where you have to travel to China or it's like that kind of show. You want to shoot here because you want to go home at night. You don't want to be in a remote location, going back to a hotel room, all that kind of stuff. And also, the community here is very supportive of each other, and it's a nice environment. And there's, it seems to be going from generation to generation. That same kind of win for you is a win for me. So that's a nice environment to work in. So there's a lot of incentive for local producers. For guest productions or service productions, it's a bit more of a challenge. I think a lot of them come here if there's something specifically we have here that they can't get somewhere else. So West Edmonton Mall would be a good example. Winter, I mean, they can get that elsewhere, but a lot of Christmas movies have been shot here, partly because of that. We've had some specific things like we've had I think the Kinsman Pool was the size of it was necessary for a film that had a different title, but where there was a plane crash. Most of the film was shooting in Calgary, but they had to shoot the underwater scene of the plane underwater. It was like a bush plane.
Yeah.
And they needed a big
No way.
pool. Yeah, so they rented the Kinsman for a week and kicked everybody else out.
How did they get the plane, the stage in there, in the water?
Well, they had a chopped up plane that they just reassembled upside down in the water, right? And you didn't see the whole thing.
Right.
On film, and that's how they did it. And so, so things like that will bring people in because there's specific need. Mm-hmm. There are other things that we have, like Fort Edmonton is like having a studio backlot if you have a film that needs one of the periods that are represented there. Right. Same thing with the Ukrainian Village to a lesser extent. Mm-hmm. And the River Valley, of course, is huge. So there are specific things that bring people here. The other thing is more on the lines of co-production. So an Edmonton producer has gone out, has met somebody or different people at different markets. They really connect and they decide they want to work together on a project. And they might bring a project to Edmonton because of their relationship. Right. So that's really important, those kind of relationship building.
So now with your new gig here at the Screen Industries Office, talk about the transition from the former Film Commission to sort of what we are now.
Well, the Film and TV Commission, which, first of all, it was housed or officed under Edmonton Economic Development. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of the primary task was supporting local filmmakers, but they really wanted to bring in those outside projects to Edmonton because they thought, this is like money that's not here that will come here. Oops, right. Sorry. So they,
it's like an import, basically.
Yeah, so it's good for economic, it's good for employment, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of what the film commissioner did, depending on who they were, was go out and beat the bushes to try to get productions to come here. Mm-hmm. Most of those productions that would come to Edmonton were more, I would say more like lower budget type stuff, whether it was movies or TV series. Which is fine because low budget is still pretty good, mm-hmm. And still lots of jobs and good paying jobs. But we were competing with all the other provinces and some states, and so it became a challenge they would offer a bit more money or a bit more something, and now you're got this sort of race to the bottom, and, right. and more often than not, we'd kind of lose out on that race because we weren't able to compete in that kind of environment. Mm-hmm. We had sort of here are our incentives, and that was it. And so when the last film commissioner left, the city decided to do a rethink on this. And one of the things so there were a bunch of working groups that were formed and met. There were surveys taken, a lot of data. And one of the things people thought was that whatever this new agency organization is, it shouldn't just be focused on film and TV. It should include all screens. Mm-hmm. So that means including interactive digital media. And as it turns out, as you probably know, we have a big sector here that's kind of under the radar of people that are doing mobile apps, doing AAA games, or doing console games, or doing mobile games. So there's a big group, and they just got a big leg up. Actually, the province just offered up a tax credit. It's not Wisconsin law yet, but it looks like it will be shortly. So that's a good thing. And so the idea is try to figure out how can we take these companies that are at whatever level they're at, whether they're film, TV, or interactive, and help lift them up, take them to the next level. Right. And that's our focus. Mm-hmm. So I'm not so much focused on bringing in, the next Christmas movie, although if they come knocking, right. I'm happy to help and would love to have them come. And there may be some incentives that we can do to have those kinds of projects still come because we want our crews to be working. Mm-hmm. But I would say a lot of our focus will be on local companies and saying, and it has been, we have gone out and done a lot of consultations saying, what are your challenges, what are your gaps? Mm-hmm. And what kinds of things do you think we could do for you? And of course, I've got a very long list, which we can't do everything, but we went through a process where we prioritized it down to about 4 or 5 things. Mm-hmm. that are kind of cut across all of those kind of really different screen industries where they could use support.
Right. So what are examples of those types of things that you can do to support these individuals or these entrepreneurs or companies?
Well, IP, acquisition and development. So whatever it is, if it's I was just at a game camp the other night where they had gotten the rights to the Trailer Park Boys, mm-hmm. and they made a mobile game off that.
Oh, cool.
So could we help out other producers or other companies getting IP that's branded like that? Because you kind of have a running start when you hit the market with something that has brand awareness, mm-hmm. and already has, in that case, a pretty loyal fan base.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. Like I've met people down in like southern US that like Trailer Park Boys. Like, oh, are you near where that's shot in Canada? I'm like, well, no, I'm on the other side of the country, and it's a big country. But it's amazing how that's just like gotten this cult following, and it expands past just Canadian people.
It still goes on, yeah. So that's a good example of how maybe it's not cheap to have to try to acquire rights to an established brand like mm-hmm. that. So and that applies to not just it applies to anything. It could apply to like a successful cookbook chain. Right. It's like any kind of IP which has a brand. So we can help out. We hope we could help out with that, and then we'd get paid back if and when the projects went forward. We also think there's an opportunity to create an incentive which will, for lack of a better word, up the marquee on people's projects. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the most obvious examples are when you're doing a feature film, you want to get a big name star. Mm-hmm. But you can only have so much money. Well, can we help out getting a better star, a bigger name mm-hmm. for the project so that it's more promotable when it's finished?
Right.
And so that's something we think about, but it's not just restricted to feature films. Like, for instance, you remember that there was a movie about penguins? Was it called the March of the Penguins?
Yeah.
When that film came out, originally got finished, it didn't have Morgan Freeman voicing over it.
Right.
It was a great film, but nobody would have gone to see it. So the distributor put up a bunch of money for Morgan Freeman, and now they had Morgan Freeman, and everyone went to see that movie.
Yeah.
So can we help out with documentaries by helping them get marquee voices mm-hmm. for voiceover? Same with video games that have story elements where they have, characters that talk. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of opportunity there to up the commercial value of these projects mm-hmm. with those elements. So where it's difficult maybe to do that on the budgets that they have. Then the other things around that, we think we can help with costs around marketing and networking, where people have to go to conferences or markets or meet people in their home office, mm-hmm. whether they're going to sell a product that they've finished or whether they have a pitch and they're going to get a broadcaster or an investor, mm-hmm. and have them not just go once but go every year for the next 5 years, so they become like part of the group, part of the in crowd, if you will.
It's like any other industry, right? The more people the people want to work with the people that they're familiar with, right?
It's very, very much that way. That's how you get films to come back to Edmonton, is these people have gone out and built those relationships,
right?
Whether they go to China or wherever. Market intelligence, knowing what the person you're selling to wants mm-hmm. and is looking for or needs, and hopefully you have it. Getting that information ahead of time, those are the easiest sales I ever made as a producer, when I knew what that person wanted and I had it.
Right.
So there are sites and there are research companies where you can get reports that give you up-to-date stuff like that. And the last thing that I think we can help out is with what I call corporate branding, mm-hmm. which is simply this. It's simply figuring out what it is that you do and becoming the place for people to go to get that. So instead of always your sales efforts going out saying, here's my projects, please invest, please license, please publish, mm-hmm. suddenly you're getting phone calls from people going, we hear you're the guys that do this.
Right.
And we need that. Let's talk.
Right. So there might be one expert in, male-driven narratives in a documentary, or, different aspects like that.
Yeah, and I do have examples where that's happened, mm-hmm. where a company here is focused on what we call fly-on-the-wall reality shows, and they got a phone call from a broadcaster one year saying, we need something in this area. Can you put together a proposal for us, and we'll license it, because we know that's what you guys do really well.
How many people are involved in the Screen Industries Office right now? I mean, what you just mentioned, all those things, it's a very comprehensive approach, and it seems like there's a lot of people trying to get their projects off the ground.
Yep.
So who do you have supporting you right now?
Well, I have a great board that was put in place before I came on the scene, that was the city of Edmonton recruited. And this is one of the things, again, we're different from before. The Film Commission was under Economic Development, Edmonton Economic Development. We're kind of more like the Edmonton Arts Council, which was set up as an arm's-length nonprofit. The city funds its operating, and it manages all of the arts grants for all various things and other things related to the city. And so that model really is working really well for the city and for people that enjoy the arts and for artists. So they said, let's do the same thing with the Edmonton Screen Industries Office. So it's set up as a nonprofit society. We've got some operating funding from the city, and we have a board that none of which are in the industry themselves. They're like lions of industry and different areas in Edmonton. And they're volunteering because they think there's a lot of potential in the sector. So I get a lot of support from them. And then I'm sublending an office from the Edmonton Arts Council, so I get a lot of logistical support here, and I have a part-time bookkeeper. That's it. And
so you're fielding a lot of calls, emails, meetings on your own.
Well, and having to figure out with the board, we figure out our priorities. So what can we do now? What can we do next month? What can we do next year? So one of our things we have to do this year is we have to raise some funds. So we are putting a proposal together that will go into the city for operating, or to extend our operating funding. And but the other is that there's a film fund. This film fund was set up by the previous mayor. It was called the Edmonton Film Fund. Originally it was $5 million. Now there's $4 million there. And it's been sitting there waiting for us to get ourselves organized to come back and make a proposal to them as to how we would administer it.
Right.
So that goes in on May 1st.
Interesting. So you propose whether you want to, divvy that up into $100,000 chunks, or you do a couple big ones, a couple smaller ones, and then also what are they looking for in terms of, and this is sort of a broader question, but how do you sort of walk the line between tried, tested, and true versus taking a chance on content or a certain platform for content?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I don't know yet in terms of what part of that would be allocated to what program, but I've sort of given you the 5 areas. So now if we were granted administration over those funds and also the operating funds, now we'd sit down and figure out what do these programs look like, how do people apply, what are the requirements, how do we choose things? That's a good one, because the Canadian way and the arts society way would be to convene juries. I don't think so. I don't think that's a good approach for what we're trying to do. I think what we do is we know what we are looking for, we communicate that clearly, and then people apply, and we have consultants that review the applications and then come to me with recommendations. And so basically we're going on what those people know and what I know to judge what we think has merit. And so it'll be up to the people applying to convince us. And, I think it doesn't preclude us taking chances on things if we think it's innovative. But on the other hand, we'll be looking for what are the commercial elements of this that will help you to market it down the road. And is one of the things you're looking for us to help you support, increase its commercial potential, in which case we'd be interested.
Right. So with the sort of shift in terms of like the more traditional route of film to now a lot more digital platforms, distribution, there's almost the lines between the different platforms are sort of becoming more blurred. Is that an advantage to producers, or does it almost open up the constraints, making it more confounding and confusing for young producers?
I think it makes it confounding and confusing for old producers like me. Young producers seem to have no problem. I look at it this way, think about IP as the concept or, the underlying idea, and think of what you make from that as a media product. Well, you could make, let's take the cookbook example. You have a successful line of cookbooks. You as a producer get the rights. Maybe the first thing you do is an app based on those cookbooks, but also their brand. And the app is successful, and so successful that you make version 2, version 3, version 4, with all new recipes.
Right.
And you take some of the revenue that's coming in for you to do some marketing, social media campaign, whatever. Now you've got a story because you've got some metrics as to how many people, first of all, have bought these cookbooks either as hard copy or ebooks, but also how many have bought your app and how many have bought the new versions. Now you go to a broadcaster like the Cooking Channel or whatever, and you say, here's some data. If we did a TV show based on this and we figure out what that looks like, it wouldn't be the same as the app, but it would have the same branding. And you get a yes. So let's say you start making a television show, and let's say it's really successful and you get a bunch of seasons. Well, once you get above 3 seasons, then you can start selling it all over the world because buyers from other countries are interested in multi-season shows, because if they air it and it's successful, they don't want to just have one season. So if you can get up to 5 seasons, it's wonderful. So, and these cookbooks, let's say, have sold internationally, so there's brand awareness already out there for the cookbooks.
Right.
So now you've got a TV show, you're selling it all over, it's airing on the Cooking Channel in Canada, and now you have somebody from a country that English is not their language saying, we really like this concept, but we want to do our own version of it.
Right.
Like Canadian Idol is like American Idol, right? Well, now you sell them the format rights, which I call mailbox money, because you have no effort is required here except to collect franchising. Okay, let's say it does really well in all of those venues. So well, you get approached by a company that makes frozen food and say, we would like to put out a line of frozen food with this brand on it now because there's so much awareness around it and so much goodwill to that brand. Well, you don't make frozen food, and this isn't a screen media product. It's an ancillary product. It'd be like selling plush toys from a Disney movie. Right. All you do is you take a royalty for that, and you negotiate a brand management role, so they can't make shoddy frozen foods because your brand is attached to that. Or maybe it's cookware. I mean, I'm talking about something that, of course, is a home run. Not all of them are going to have that. But from this one IP, now you have all of this stuff. So if you ask me if it's confusing, well, it's complicated. It's a lot more work, but there's a lot more opportunity for revenue. And then you take that revenue back here to Edmonton, if you're based here. You start hiring more people. You rent a bigger office. And you start developing more IP. And if you're smart, you'll do more in that area because now you have corporate branding. Right. That you're the
guy.
You're the cooking.
You're the cooking guy.
So now you might do something just on desserts. I know this sounds crazy.
Are you making this up as you go? What's your cookbook called?
Classic Cooking.
Classic Cooking with Josh Miller.
So it's not as sexy as making a feature film with big, huge stars, which doesn't mean we can't also support that if that's something that comes along. But it really is just an interesting world right now where there's all of this opportunity, and I think, it used to be where, as a filmmaker, you were a bit of an island, and you could make your movie, and then or a TV show, and then other people would do all the end stuff. Right. Now you have to do it from cradle to grave, but the money comes back to you.
So what most excites you about your new role coming up in the near future and the future of this industry and the possibilities?
Well, I like two things right away. First of all, I like creating things, whether it's a script or a new organization, and this has been like a startup, so it's been really interesting doing that. Secondly, on every project that I do, I want to learn something. And I am learning a ton of stuff. And I'm meeting a ton of people as well locally here. And that just gets you out of bed every day because it's something new all the time. Mm-hmm. Our plan, which we're still developing, and we've hired a research company to develop a baseline of metrics for us so that we can report to the city and also report to our stakeholders what the growth is, if there is growth, mm-hmm. and what are the metrics that show that. But I would love to see us 5 years from now have some more, like we have a BioWare, maybe we have 2 more BioWares.
Right. So really kind of like impactful concepts or organizations that we can really be proud of as Edmontonians or Albertans or even Canadians if it gets to that scope, right?
Yeah. And we don't have to go somewhere else to work. Mm-hmm. Like there's enough work here, whether you're on the film crew or you're a programmer, mm-hmm. that you come out of NAID or you come out of whatever school you come out of, and there's opportunity right here. Mm-hmm. You don't have to go to Montreal, you don't have to go to Vancouver. Mm-hmm. That will be really important. And then ultimately, I guess, down the road, it would be great to have a hub, So a hub where all the screen industries are there. There's sound stages, there's fiber, there's everything that you want. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of cross-fertilization between the companies and work that they do. Right. That would be a nice thing to have happen, down the road.
So, selfish question here: what common mistakes do you see, young producers or filmmakers or anyone getting into this world make commonly?
You mean all the mistakes I've made?
Yeah, in the past or last week or yesterday or whatever mistakes.
Well, I would say this, and these are really things that I went through. I was a shiny object guy, and being in Edmonton, you couldn't sort of I thought you couldn't specialize in one particular area. So if you look back at the stuff that my company made, it's very eclectic. We never branded ourselves, mm-hmm. except maybe as quality, right? So I would say figure out 1 or 2 areas that you think you could focus on. You bring something to it, you know something about it, and you're passionate about it. And become branded for those things. And then secondly, the other thing that producers do, because it's just how it goes, is you kind of live project to project, right? Mm-hmm. Think from the earliest possible time about your company and how can you make it sustainable and how can you make it grow and not, have gaps where you're waiting for one project to get going and your cash flow is being drained. So get business company, consulting experience to come in at every stage and help you and bring your company along. This is really, it's great to have a win to get a project done. Right. But so many companies, it's very difficult. They do start growing and they don't really have a plan, and it's very difficult, especially if they can't find financing for their company. Right.
You can't rest on your laurels. You got to always be thinking of the next thing and the next thing, right?
For sure, but you got to be thinking about what thing you're thinking about. It can't just be that next film or that next TV show. It has to be in the context of a business plan for your company.
Right. Do you still get to write much?
Well, I took the last 2 years off, and I did a bunch of writing, which was fun. Mm-hmm. But now I don't have the time. But I'll return to it in the future. I always have that in my back pocket.
Yeah, awesome, Josh. I really appreciate your time. Where can anyone who's listening to this who wants to get in contact with you find you?
The best thing is to just send me an email to jmiller@edmontonscreen.com.
Perfect.
And then we'll take it from there.
Okay. Well, thanks so much again for the time. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you again in the future.
Okay, thanks, Shane.
Thank you.
City of Champion listeners, as always, very appreciative of your time and attention. I hope you found this episode entertaining and informative, just like I did. See you next week.